revisiting a relocation at 8 o'clock. Now though, Jon Snow and Krishnan Guru Murthy have the latest Channel 4 news.
Romantic, idealistic, radical. But Labour's leader in their darkest hour, Michael Foot, is dead at 96. And it wasn't a donkey jacket, but the myth lived on. Good evening. One of the greatest literary scholars ever to lead a British political party, one of the most radical thinkers too, Michael Foot was one of the dominant forces inside Labour for half a century. He'll be remembered for his political negatives rather than his literary and philosophical positives. He opposed war, championed the poor, and trumpeted the unions. But his political legacy was defeat at Margaret Thatcher's hands and Labour's long exile from power. Tonight, his story and what he said of her. What about more recent figures? I mean, Thatcher, for example.
Unspeakable.
Also tonight, the government refuses calls to tell the public what offence one of the Bulger child murderers, Jon Venables, has been returned to jail for. Basking in a state visit this end, South Africa's President Zuma gives the folks back home a less than flattering account of the British. And Tory High Command in the dark, William Hague now admits he's only known for a couple of months about Tory funder Lord Ashcroft's tax status. And politicians from all parties have been paying tributes to the former Labour leader Michael Foot, who's died at his North London home aged 96. A lifelong socialist and founder member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, Mr. Foot took over the leadership of a deeply divided party in 1980 and went on to lose the 1983 election on a strongly left-wing manifesto. His death was announced to the House of Commons by Justice Secretary Jack Straw, who told MPs the news would be received with great sadness, not only in my own party, but across the country as a whole. Here's Gary Gibbon.
He was the most radical leader of the post-war Labour Party, and many Labour activists took Michael Foot to their hearts. But with the voters, it was a very different story.
I'm deeply ashamed that we have permitted that power to rest with such a government as we have in Britain.
Michael Foot was ashamed of the 1983 election result. Labour had run a chaotic election campaign, and Michael Foot only narrowly avoided dragging Labour to third place behind the alliance of Liberals and Social Democrats. Michael Foot's left-wing manifesto promised withdrawal from Europe, huge public spending, renationalisation and unilateral nuclear disarmament. One Labour right-winger described it as the longest suicide note in history, as Michael Foot recalled at his own 90th birthday party.
They said it was the longest suicide note in history. That was what I think Gerald Cartman said. He got him elected himself on him, by the way, but that's not...
Michael Foot was born into a liberal intellectual family, and he inherited his father's passion for books.
Picture of him up there, by the way. There he is, my father, overlooking at the whole thing. He says, let the boy be known for his library, and that at least I've carried out that commission.
He first stood for Parliament in 1935. As an orator and a journalist, he was at his best battling his pet evils. In the early days, fascism. In later years, unemployment and the nuclear bomb.
So I believe the first big significance of this tremendous march and of this tremendous movement is that it is a mighty upsurge of democratic protest against the military dictatorship.
Michael Foot worshipped the leader of the Labour left, Aneurin Bevan, and fought his corner in the fierce party battles of the 1950s. But they fell out when Bevan backed the bomb and Michael Foot accused him of selling out. It was only when he was 61 years old that Michael Foot swapped the soapbox for ministerial office. They were testing times with the party divided on economic policy and on Europe.
You can't build democracy in Europe on the basis of betraying democracy in Britain. That's not the way to do it.
When Margaret Thatcher turfed Labour out of office, Michael Foot was the candidate of the left, and he beat Dennis Healey to the leadership. But the left was hardening, and many turned against Michael Foot. And many on the right of the party were preparing to walk out, whatever Michael Foot said.
I want them all to stay in our ranks to help us. I don't agree with those who say it doesn't matter if they go. I want them all to stay.
In all, 28 Labour MPs would leave to form the SDP, which briefly soared in the polls. The Falklands War boosted Margaret Thatcher's popularity.
What's your reaction, rejoice at that news.
And Michael Foot's discomforts seemed to multiply by the day.
The Labour MP, Mr Walter Johnson, said he looked like an out-of-work navvy. Mr Foot's office later pointed out that Mr Foot was wearing a black suit under his jacket.
17 years on, with his wife, the filmmaker Jill Craigie, he dug out the offending coat.
Not so bad, it's very good it is.
Has it got a button off?
No, it must have. No.
Oh my God.
What?
It's got a button off.
Even after the disastrous 1983 general election, Michael Foot never gave up on the policies the voters had rejected.
Nothing could injure us more than if the Labour Party turned its back on the programme which it stated. That would breed cynicism. The greatest danger to democratic politics is cynicism.
But in retirement, even as New Labour took form, he didn't attack his successors. Even before the age of TV election debates, Michael Foot struggled with presentation on the modern media. But he was a collector of heroes, an orator and writer of rare gifts, a great opposer, and a passionate radical.
And we'll be looking at Michael Foot's literary record later in the programme. Gordon Brown met Michael Foot for the first time in 1972. The student, Mr Brown, was just embarking on his political career as rector of the University of Edinburgh. Mr Foot was in Labour's shadow cabinet. Today, Gordon Brown paid tribute to his predecessor as Labour leader.
He was a man of great passion. He firmly believed in the principles of the National Health Service. He fought very hard for peace and disarmament. He wrote brilliantly and eloquently about the need for social justice. And I think he is held in deep respect for the conviction with which he put his views both in print and in his speeches. And I think that's why, irrespective of people's political views today, people will mourn all across the country a man of deep principle, but a man who was also a good man and a very compassionate man.
Earlier I spoke to Lord Neil Kinnock, who took over as leader of the Labour Party after Michael Foot. I began by asking him that although Michael Foot was never after advancement or even seemed particularly ambitious, he still sought the leadership of the Labour Party and got it. What went wrong?
What went wrong, as far as I was concerned, was he didn't take my advice and instead listened, for all the best, generous reasons in the world, to those who said to him, Michael, you must accept the leadership in order to save the party. And such was his loyalty and dedication to the Labour cause that he did it. Everyone knows that he invited misery, which was delivered in full force. But it also meant that because he was there, and because he fought, and because he sustained the arguments, Labour survived as a fighting force instead of being driven into irrelevance, doomed indeed to irrelevance, by the factionalists and the self-indulgent people who otherwise would have taken over.
Did he know it was a mistake? Did he look back on it as a mistake?
At the time that he accepted the leadership, he knew it was an act of greater hope than practicality. But he had to fulfill the role, he thought, as a duty to the Labour cause, the cause of democratic socialism, the cause of enlightenment in which he so strongly believed. And faced with that reality, he felt that he couldn't back away, despite the fact that a small number of us, like me, counselled him strongly against it. In the end, I was wrong, and he was right, because he did manage to salvage much, much more than anybody else possibly could have.
Does he prove, perhaps, that a man of letters, a romantic, an idealist, a scholar, cannot seriously lead a modern political party?
He was scholarly, certainly. He was erudite. He was creative. He was all those things. And he used this remarkable spectrum of knowledge, of literature and of poetry and of politics and of history as weapons in the fight for the rational course, the fight for the liberal cause in which he so devoutly believed.
He was married to the radical filmmaker Jill Craigie. Did she stiffen his backbone or mellow his heart?
Jill had many influences, amongst which was to charm him perpetually. They were in love till the last moment that she breathed. But she was a radical force, there's no doubt at all about that. She never had to stiffen his backbone. She did give him encouragement, and she, of course, was the greatest passion of his in what was in many ways such a passionate life. They were true soulmates, and one of the amazing realities has been the way in which Michael overcame the loss of Jill and continued to be creative right up until almost recent months.
Neil Kinnock talking to us earlier. Well, joining us from Westminster now, the former Conservative Deputy Prime Minister, Lord HESELTINE. And in a way, Lord HESELTINE, you must look back on Michael Foot in 1983 as the best thing that ever happened to the Conservative Party.
I think that's true. But can I make just one point? Because it's very fashionable to see politicians, as a lot of people, in it for what they can get out of it. And if there's one thing that you can say about Michael Foot, there is no conceivable way in which he sought anything except to serve the convictions he held so deeply. You may not agree with the convictions, and I certainly didn't, but you could never doubt that that was the motivation and that there was no material gain or benefit to Michael in the long political career that he enjoyed.
Well, of course, that is a message which could well ring in a few ears after the expenses scandal that has riven Westminster in the last few months.
Well, that's why I think the point is worth making, that the expenses scandal, of course, has been horrific, and there's no conceivable way you can do anything other than condemn it. But it's important, I think, to just have that sense of perspective that, bad though it is still something that applies to only a significant minority of members of the House. But if I go back to your question, which is important, Michael was the ideal opponent in the context of the 1983 general election, in which defence played a very important role. And he had his views, but he somehow represented those views. I mean, the donkey jacket, you can't overestimate the significance of somebody who turned up at the cenotaph looking like that. I mean, the cenotaph...
Queen Mother said it was a very nice jacket.
Yes, she may well have done. But the cenotaph represents Britain at its most poignant, huge memories affecting all classes and all people.
But, you know, have you thought, you know, if he had prevailed in some way, and perhaps somehow the government had fallen, you might have become Prime Minister one day. Well, he robbed you of that, and perhaps in two he brought us Tony Blair.
I must tell you, I never thought of it in that context. My task in 1983 was to help the Conservatives win for, I believe, the defence interests of this country. And Michael Foot stood for unilateralism. The day that we turned that into one-sided disarmament, I think the Labour Party were finished. And I happen to believe that if Denis Healey had won, he would have been a much more formidable leader of the opposition.
And then, of course, we might never have had Tony Blair. But because you had Michael Foot, you had Tony Blair, and you were out of power for a decade and who knows how long.
We were in power for a very long time, and of course the interesting thing historically is that by the time the Labour Party came back to government, basically they were pursuing conservative type policies. They'd accepted all the basic arguments that we had long since represented to the British people. So my own guess is that Denis Healey would have changed more quickly, much more quickly than Michael Foot, and we might have had a tougher fight on our hands through the 1980s.
Michael Heseltine, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we will return to Michael Foot later in the programme. There are growing calls tonight for the government to reveal the reason why Jon Venables, one of the two boys who killed the toddler James Bulger in Liverpool 17 years ago, has been sent back to prison. Venables, who is now 27, was given a new identity when he was controversially freed in 2001. The Justice Minister, Jack Straw, insisted today that there were public interest reasons for not saying what Venables had done to break the terms of his licence. Carl Dillon reports now from Liverpool.
These were the images that convicted 10-year-olds Jon Venables and Robert Thompson, the youngest murderers in British criminal history. For killing James Bulger, they both served 8 years before being released on licence in 2001.
I thought that the parole board would never have let them out unless they were absolutely convinced that they were ready to be rehabilitated, get back into society again. I mean, I couldn't speak for Thompson's progress, but I know that Venables did very well academically.
But last night, the Ministry of Justice revealed that Venables, now 27, was for the first time in an adult prison.
We can confirm that Jon Venables has been recalled to custody following a breach of licence conditions. Offenders on licence are subject to strict conditions. If they breach those conditions, they are subject to immediate recall.
James Bulger's mother, who has since remarried, has always felt her son's killers should never have been released.
I don't think they should ever get out anyway. I accepted the 15 years, but if it was me, I'd give them a lot longer. They'd never get out.
Now Denise Fergus, so far her only reaction to Venables' return to custody has been on the Twitter website, where she wrote, "I would like to let everyone know Jon Venables is where he belongs tonight, behind bars. This is my son's justice." These are the images which everyone remembers. Venables taking 2-year-old James by the hand in the Strand shopping centre. A short time after that image was captured, the three boys left the shopping centre by this exit, and Thompson and Venables took James Bulger up the road here towards the canal.
And their intentions there were to push him into the canal and drown him.
But they were seen by passers-by.
So Thompson and Venables then came all the way back over the bridge and then made their way then out towards the railway line at Walton, where they killed him.
How has this news over the last 24 hours affected his mother?
For years now, Denise has always been concerned that if Thompson and Venables are released, that they may come and cause either her or, more importantly, her 3 sons either hurt or anxiety. So when this news came out last night, it really was a serious concern for her.
The murder of a toddler by 2 10-year-olds has always aroused strong emotions, especially here.
Should never have considered letting out. He should have got what happened to that little baby. He should have got done to him.
Obviously it proves that he hasn't been fully rehabilitated if he's obviously been nicked again for whatever it is.
There is frustration that the government has been unable to explain whatever it is that has put Venables back behind bars.
I'm sorry I can't give more details at the moment. I appreciate the very intense public interest in this. But the public needs to be reassured that there was information which suggested conclusively that there had been a breach of Jon Venables' licence conditions.
Although the Home Secretary, Alan Johnson, said the public had a right to know how Venables had breached his licence, and they would, in due course, find out. Carl Dillon, Channel 4 News, Merseyside.
So Jon Venables is tonight back in the prison system. The Ministry of Justice has not revealed what conditions he breached, but they have hinted that more information about what put him there will be revealed at a later date. Venables was released in 2001 and given a new identity at the taxpayer's expense. What happens now that his anonymity is potentially at risk? Our Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel has this report.
For the last 9 years, Jon Venables has been the anonymous face in the crowd. With a new identity, at great public cost, the convicted murderer has carved out a new life. Last week, the 27-year-old disappeared from that everyday hustle and bustle. He's now in an undisclosed prison. What he did to breach the conditions of his licensed freedom has not been revealed. But the statement from the Ministry of Justice suggested details will eventually emerge.
Well, it would seem that the Ministry of Justice are very keen that the public should feel that they are going to get information about this. This was an almost unique case of enormous public interest, and if the public felt that they were being misled or having things withheld from them, it would damage our belief in the criminal justice system.
I doubt that the reason for the recall would be a minor technical matter like not turning up for appointment. The number of lifers recalled to custody each year is very, very small, 30 or 40, and staff on the ground tell me you have to have a very good reason for recalling a lifer to prison. Normally it would be charged with a serious offence, charged not convicted, or the behaviour is causing real concern to the supervisor in that there might be a risk to the public.
On top of the general licence conditions, there are more specific restrictions. Venables is barred from entering the Merseyside area and from making any contact with James Bulger's family and with the other killer, Robert Thompson. But whatever he's done, another priority for his handlers is to maintain his anonymity. The media is barred from reporting anything that could lead to exposing his identity, but having breached the conditions, maintaining that secrecy becomes ever more difficult.
If we learn his new identity, then at public expense, they'll give him another one, and it is expensive.
So he's entitled to yet another new identity, is he?
He is entitled. The decision was made in 2001 that he and Mr. Thompson should be given this very unusual protection, and unless things have changed dramatically, and there's no suggestion as yet that they have, he is entitled to a new identity if he needs one, and if that is discovered, then another one after that, and on it goes.
Regulations state that Venables will appear before the parole board within 28 days of his return to custody. Such a hearing will decide the consequences of the violation, how serious it was, and whether it's safe to release him again. Despite the current public outcry, the European Court of Human Rights in 1999 removed any political influence on such a decision.
Simon Israel reporting. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to the former Chief Inspector of Prisons, Lord David Ramsbotham. I asked him whether the public could judge whether the treatment of Jon Venables has been correct if it doesn't know what he's now done.
Because we don't know exactly why he has been returned to prison and therefore what condition he's breached, certainly the public are not in a position to answer those sort of questions.
Is it important that one day they should be able to do so?
Well, I'm not sure about the public. I mean, it'll be very interesting. I don't know what the cause, what the reason is. But certainly the people who do, I hope, are going into very carefully what might have happened, because I'm sure there are lessons to be learned in it.
Well, the Ministry of Justice said we will find out one day, but
yes.
When that will be is unknown. Do you feel that there is a point in future time when it's safe to tell people?
Well, I mean, again, I don't know what the condition is, and I think the people, they've got to judge it very carefully. I mean, obviously, it's in public interest to know why, and how much of the why is told is a matter of judgment. But I think because the Ministry of Justice have released the fact that he has been recalled, which, because of the case being in such public interest, I think they've got to go on and qualify and tell us at least the bare details.
Do you think, objectively, that it's a vindication of a liberal society that they ever were released, or a damnation?
Oh, I think it's an absolute vindication. I mean, I think here we are. We're what? He's now 27, 28. He's been out for nearly 10 years. We've heard absolutely nothing about Thompson. And of course, who can predict absolutely everything that's going to happen in human nature? You have people who live totally blameless lives and suddenly commit a crime in their 70s.
Do you think that the commission of a serious offence, if it is, and it must be to have gone back to prison again, deserves anonymity as an adult?
If it's a serious offence, I don't think so, because, of course, no serious offence ever gets absolute anonymity. And I think we need, you know, it's worth the public actually being informed as to what actually happened, because After all, remembering, I mean, you go back, the Bulger case, as it was called, resulted in the, I think, huge rise, certainly in the prison population that's happened since then. It's led to a development of a sort of penal population. It's led to a sort of demonization of youth and all sorts of side effects. So it's very much a case which has always been in the public domain.
Lord David Ramsbotham, former Chief Inspector of Prisons, talking to me earlier. Over to Christian now for some of the day's domestic and international news.
The South African President, Jacob Zuma, began a state visit to Britain today with a ceremonial inspection of troops and a procession along the Mall. But the President got the visit off to an undiplomatic start, with comments in the South African press accusing Britain of a colonial attitude and thinking that their culture is superior to others.
Meeting the Queen on Horse Guards Parade. The President of South Africa and the First Lady. Or possibly the Third Lady, as Thobeka Madiba is Jacob Zuma's third wife, in the traditional Zulu system of polygamy which he champions. Reviewing the Guard of Honour with the Duke of Edinburgh. History will probably never reveal what they said to each other. Both men have a reputation for saying what they think, or being misquoted and misunderstood, depending on your point of view. On the eve of the visit, President Zuma took a swipe at his hosts, being quoted in a South African newspaper saying,
"When the British came to our country, they said everything we were doing was barbaric, was wrong, inferior in whatever way. I don't know why they're continuing thinking that their culture is more superior than others. The British have done that before, as they colonised us, and they continue to do this, and it's an unfortunate thing."
The Queen and he seemed to be getting along fine nonetheless. President Zuma had, after all, been provoked by a column in the Daily Mail, not famous for its cultural sensitivity, which called him, amongst other epithets, a sex-obsessed bigot. At the Dorchester, his entourage was making sure they had the right clothes for this evening's state banquet. Relations between the two countries are actually pretty good, and the statement contradicts official policy.
If he held that view, he would not be meeting, Prince Charles would not have come here, the Queen would not be meeting him, and he would not be calling on business to continue, and he would not have brought a large business contingent to be part of the state visit.
So maybe it was for those back home who are embarrassed by the 100% Zulu boy image, white liberals and westernised black opposition. In the Rainbow Nation it isn't done to talk about race, so attacking old colonialists is a way of doing that, without doing that. At Buckingham Palace, the Queen gave Mr. Zuma a book about deer hunting, not known to be one of his pastimes. She showed him her mementos of state visits past. He gave her a chess set, which seemed fine, until she showed him what his illustrious predecessor had given her. Yes, a not dissimilar chess set. Nelson Mandela is universally admired and loved. That's something much harder for Jacob Zuma to emulate.
The Ministry of Defence has named a soldier killed in Afghanistan on Monday as Carlo Apolis of 4 Battalion The Rifles. His colleagues paid tribute to him as an outstanding soldier. The 28-year-old was shot while on foot patrol near Sangin in Helmand Province. Originally from South Africa, Rifleman Apolis came to the UK 6 years ago. He was on his first operation in Afghanistan. One person has been killed and 4 others injured after 2 buses crashed in the village of Newfield in County Durham. The crash happened shortly after 4 o'clock this afternoon, just outside the town of Chesterley Street. One of the bus drivers is believed to have died, while 3 elderly passengers were taken to hospital for treatment. The John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford has suspended heart surgery on children after the deaths of 4 children in the last 3 months. The hospital trust says the suspension is precautionary while it reviews its paediatric cardiac care regime, which normally carries out 100 operations a year. Suicide bombers in Iraq have killed at least 31 people and wounded dozens more in the central city of Baqubah just days before parliamentary elections. 2 car bombs exploded within minutes of each other near government buildings. A third blast hit Baqubah's main hospital, where victims of the earlier attacks were being treated. The bombings are likely to confirm the worst fears of many who'd been expecting attacks before Sunday's vote, which is seen as a key moment in the lead-up to the eventual withdrawal of American forces. An investigation has been launched into why a young child was allowed to help direct air traffic at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. In transmissions broadcast by local media, the child can be heard apparently directing pilots for departure.
JetBlue 171, contact departure.
Over departure, JetBlue 171, awesome job.
AirMax 403, contact departure, adios.
In another transmission, the child can be heard clearing a plane for takeoff, apparently under the supervision of an adult. The incident reportedly happened 2 weeks ago, and the age of the child is not known. The Federal Aviation Administration said the employees involved in the incident were not controlling air traffic until the investigation was over.
After the break, William Hague says he only recently found out Lord Ashcroft wasn't paying UK tax, and Olympic gold medalist Amy Williams gets a hero's welcome with an open-top bus tour of her hometown of Bath.
Imagine a world without fish.
What is the tuna that you serve, and how is it caught?
In a stunning feature-length documentary, journalist and author Charles Clover investigates the catastrophic results of the abuse of our most vital resource, the oceans.
It is relatively simple to solve. Our entire philosophical approach has to change.
End of the Line, Saturday at 7:15 on 4.
Who is David Cameron? We have no idea.
Did you get that?
I don't know, and I suspect he may not know either. Is he really the genuine article, or is he somebody who's simply better than his predecessors at presentation?
Andrew Rawnsley, back on the warpath, presents Cameron Uncovered. Dispatches, Monday at 8 on 4.
"7:31. Let's go to Christian now for a roundup of tonight's main headlines.
Politicians have been paying tribute to the former Labour leader Michael Foot, who has died aged 96. Mr Foot led the party at its lowest point in the 1980s, losing to Margaret Thatcher in 1983. But today, Gordon Brown described him as a genuine British radical.
He fought very hard for peace and disarmament. He wrote brilliantly and eloquently about the need for social justice, and I think he is held in deep respect for the conviction with which he put his views both in print and in his speeches.
The Justice Secretary has acknowledged the intense public interest in why Jon Venables, one of the killers of James Bulger, has been returned to custody. But Jack Straw said there were good reasons for not saying how Venables had breached his parole. The South African President, Jacob Zuma, has begun a 3-day state visit with a tour of Buckingham Palace. Downing Street earlier declined to comment on South African press reports that Mr Zuma had accused the British of looking down on South Africans. And the Shadow Foreign Secretary, William Hague, came under pressure in the House today over Lord Ashcroft's tax status. Tonight, he said that he became aware in the last few months that the Conservative donor was still not paying tax as a British resident.
So it would appear that Lord Ashcroft, the former Conservative Party treasurer and a major donor, only told the party leadership that he was still a non-dom for tax purposes in the last few months. That's the implication of tonight's comments by William Hague, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and the man who pushed Lord Ashcroft's peerage through. Cathy Newman has this report.
William Hague's kept mum for days over what he knew about the Tory donor Lord Ashcroft's tax status. Tonight, the Shadow Foreign Secretary said he's only known for a few months that the Tory peer hadn't kept his promise to become a permanent UK resident. Lord Ashcroft was twice turned down for a peerage because he was based mainly in Belize, but he finally made it to the Lords in 2000. He said he owed his elevation to the Tory leader at the time, William Hague. Lord Ashcroft only became a member of the House behind me because he promised in writing to become a permanent resident in this country, which meant paying full UK taxes. But he then changed that undertaking, pledging instead to become a long-term resident. That allowed him to avoid paying taxes on his substantial overseas earnings. It was that subtle change that Hague claimed tonight he'd only found out about in the last few months. He implied in a BBC radio interview that Lord Ashcroft kept his senior colleagues in the dark, that he remained a so-called non-dom. That is, he didn't pay full British tax.
Michael Ashcroft never told you that the undertaking you had given on his behalf had been renegotiated and that therefore was worthless.
No, I knew the Cabinet Office would set that out and agree it with Michael Ashcroft, but I would not, of course, know the details of that.
So you didn't know it until he issued his statement on Monday?
Well, I knew it in advance of that.
When?
But, well, over the last few months I knew about that, and of course I was very keen to support him then in making his position public.
The Foreign Secretary called for Lord Ashcroft to be sacked as Conservative Deputy Chairman.
Well, this is an extraordinary and damning revelation because Lord Ashcroft has failed to come clean with the leaders of the Conservative Party, and the leaders of the Conservative Party have failed to come clean over the last few months with the rest of the country. These are promises that were made in respect of a peerage that was given, and now tax has not been paid, and instead it's been given to the Conservative Party for the General Election Fund.
The Shadow Foreign Secretary was bombarded with questions about Lord Ashcroft when he stood in for David Cameron in the Commons today, but he tried to turn the tables on Labour.
The question is about one man in the House of Lords.
People in glass houses should not start throwing stones.
People who have promised to pay their taxes and give us assurances should pay their taxes. And what has happened to the tens of millions of pounds of taxes that the Shadow Foreign Secretary promised would be paid by Lord Ashcroft?
If she wants to discuss the House of Lords, I'm sure she will want to explain the position of Lord Paul.
Here's the man targeted by William Hague. Like Lord Ashcroft, Lord Paul admits he doesn't pay tax on his overseas earnings. But he says because he's lived in Britain for so long, he's deemed to be domiciled here, so he'd have to pay inheritance tax in the UK. But he told Channel 4 News there could be as many as 100 non-doms in the Lords.
In my view is there are quite a lot, more near the 100 who are not domiciled. But every pair, as I explained to you, has a little different status. To try and compare one because it suits you politically, that is not how tax issues are decided. Tax issues are decided by the Finance Act and not by your political stunts.
A new law going through Parliament will ban non-dom peers and MPs. But Lord Paul told us he's been advised the legislation will still allow him to avoid tax on his overseas earnings.
My understanding is that my status as a deemed domicile qualifies me to stay in the House of Lords, and I have every intention to stay in the House of Lords when the law passes.
Whatever the difficulties for Labour, though, it's the Tory leader who has the biggest problem. Pollsters say the daily revelations risk reinforcing suggestions that Conservatives are a party for the rich, out of touch with reality.
Well, as we have done before, we asked the Conservatives again for an interview about Lord Ashcroft, but no one was available. Now, back to Krishnan for some of the day's sport and business news.
Amy Williams, Britain's only medalist in the Winter Olympics, has been given an open-top parade through the streets of her hometown of Bath. Her gold medal in the women's skeleton at Vancouver made her the first individual British gold medalist in the Games in 30 years. The 27-year-old said her success had taken hard training, even though she hadn't always had the best facilities.
Amy Williams' tour bus usually shows people the sights of Bath. Today, she was the big attraction.
Oh, that is a tremendous start.
On Whistler's Bob Skeleton track, Amy Williams coolly nicked half a second from under the noses of her rivals. A massive margin in this 90-mile-an-hour sport, and she won Britain's only gold of the Games. Incredibly, this is Team GB's Skeleton Training Centre just outside Bath. Not even a full track, just a dry run for practising your run-up.
For 4 years, Amy Williams has been quietly getting the bus from Bath to the training centre in the woods where she practised those skeleton starts. Now the bus has her name on it and everyone knows who she is.
She's done so well for the country and we've all enjoyed watching the Olympics, so it's just nice to welcome her back to her home city, really.
I was watching telly this morning and I saw what she was actually practicing on, and it was just, you know, it looked like you couldn't win on something like that, but she's done amazing. It's great.
Amy Williams says because the British sliders don't have their own ice track, they probably looked like the poor relations, but all the time they were looking for other ways to get that edge.
We do have to travel around the world and hope that other nations let us on for a week here and a week there. And I mean, yeah, that does mean that we adapt very quickly. We get to learn tracks very quickly, and you know, maybe we have to, I don't know, be more intense in the other areas. So our physical training, maybe we work harder than other nations.
Until you've actually been out and seen a race, seen what it's all about. Can you really sort of fully enter into what Amy goes through at each competition?
Have you ever had a go?
Not on the ice. I have been down the dry slope, but I'm not sure whether I should say that.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. It was great fun. I didn't run, I just laid on it and I was pushed off, and it was just amazing.
Soon, Amy will be nose to the grindstone or nose to the ice, training for the next Winter Olympics. But tonight she admitted it will be a relief to take off the medal and collapse on the sofa. Jane Death, Channel 4 News, Bath.
British Airways has suggested it's preparing itself for a long strike, saying 1/4 of its staff has volunteered to work if a threatened walkout goes ahead. The head of the airline said 1,000 staff members had volunteered to replace cabin crew, with a further 5,000 offering to help if the strike went ahead. BA said it was also preparing to hire a temporary fleet of crewed charter planes. Industrial action over cuts to cabin crew could begin as early as next week. ITV has announced its latest results, showing a slight return to profit after large losses in 2008. The broadcaster reported a pre-tax profit of £25 million in 2009, compared with a £2.7 billion loss in the previous year. It said a series of cost cuts and an increase in its share of the advertising market helped move out of the red. After weeks of market fears over a possible sovereign debt default in Greece, the government in Athens has soothed market nerves somewhat, announcing a package of austerity measures aimed at saving €4.8 billion and easing its budget crisis. But many people in Athens responded angrily to the new measures, which include pensions freezes, an increase in sales tax and cuts to public sector pay. The EU welcomed the move after weeks of calling on Greece to ease fears that its economic problems could undermine the Eurozone. And the announcement of those Greek austerity measures seems to have had a positive impact on the markets. At the close, the index of 100 leading shares was up by 49 points. A short time ago, the pound was up against the dollar by 1.5 cents, and sterling was up against the euro by 1/3 of a cent.
After the break, an idealist and a scholar with a passion for the romantic poets, Michael Foot, the man, and as the parties scramble to bring social networking into their election campaigns, is Sarah Brown's army of Twitter followers Gordon's secret weapon?
I snogged a swan.
I was eaten alive by my pet python.
A millionaire banker bought my wife.
My orgasms are so loud, I got an asbo.
I had a sex change without telling my wife.
A lion ate my head.
They're read by 9 million people every week. But have you ever wondered where the stories come from? Are any of them actually real? Cutting Edge explores the modern phenomenon of this multi-million-pound magazine industry and asks, is it more about selling stories than telling them?
Trying to track down a guy who had an erection for 7 years.
My Daughter Grew Another Head and other true life stories. Thursday at 9 on 4.
Okay, brain, think.
If you've got something to say about television, there's now a place where you can find your voice.
Think about it. Thank you.
Back to it. Next! To get involved and join the conversation about television, go to channel4.com/the TV show.
David Cameron famously said last year that too many tweets might make a twat. But in truth, all political parties are embracing as many social media tools as they can possibly get their hands on in the run-up to the general election. At the head of the pack is the Prime Minister's wife, with an online Twitter following that's now more than 1 million larger than any other British politician. So will Sarah Brown turn out to be Labour's secret online weapon come the election? Our technology correspondent Benjamin Cohen has this.
Last night it was the 10th birthday party of the online community Mumsnet, and it was held at Google's London HQ. Politicians, including the leaders of every major party, have been falling over themselves to chat with Mumsnet members. But the person who really strikes a chord on the net is the Prime Minister's wife, Sarah.
I'm pleased to be here tonight as Mr. Sarah Brown, and I want to introduce you to my wonderful wife, Sarah Brown.
I love the chance to chat with people from all over the country. And my favourite question was actually one that I didn't even see at the time. I know this is what we all say when we go on Mumsnet, but the favourite question that I missed was, what's it like being married to the ultimate civil servant? I bet he has fantastic ... pens.
Mrs. Brown's following on the social networking website Twitter is well ahead of any political figure. Perhaps partly because she steers clear of party politics. But she told us that during the general election, it's inevitable that her tweets about her daily life will include the campaign trail around the country with the Prime Minister. As it's her authenticity that attracts more than 1 million people, can actual politicians match that?
It is me. And, sometimes maybe that makes the sort of evil handlers quite worried. But, I think that's what you have to do. And, it is genuine dialogue. I think it is important if you're a politician to think before you send. That's obvious. But not to think too hard before you send. Because if you think too hard before you send, you end up sounding like an automaton. And that's what puts people off about politics, frankly.
Labour's election campaign chief Douglas Alexander is just the latest politician to take part in the web chat, trying to tap, albeit with just 2 fingers, into the online electorate.
And then you just reply.
Over at the Conservatives' online election office, they've developed iPhone apps and their own social campaigning website, and David Cameron does have 16,000 Facebook fans, but it's not actually written by him.
Well, I think he has to decide what's the best use of his time. I mean, Gordon Brown's not on Twitter, and the truth is that these social media only really work when they're authentic, and that means you have to do it yourself. And I think David's view is that unless he's actually going to commit to doing it himself, he wouldn't want to do something that he was actually getting a member of staff to do on his behalf.
In the past, this is how politicians used to communicate with the public. Journalists like me would attend lobby briefings, go to press conferences and conduct interviews, and then analyse and interpret what the politicians said. But thanks to the rise of online social media, politicians can take me out of the picture and communicate directly with voters.
I'm definitely trying to cut you out. Certainly with that direct communication, it actually cuts out the middleman, lets you speak directly and engage with your audience without any interpretation going on from those in the media who might not have the same spin as we would like to just deal direct.
Obviously, not everyone will read Sarah Brown's tweets, but the company behind Barack Obama's successful online campaign say that if Mrs. Brown and the politicians get social media right, it could inspire offline campaigning.
The real lesson from the Obama campaign, from the people who worked on that, is that you can build a relationship with supporters that turns them into advocates for your cause or candidate in their community, making millions of phone calls through the website, attending events that were organised online in their own local communities. And I think building that army of advocates is very traditional campaigning, traditional politics, but done with modern tools.
And the real Benjamin Cohen is logged into Twitter right now if you want to discuss that report with him. That's www.twitter.com, and @Benjamin Cohen is his Twitter username. 6 years ago, ahead of his 90th birthday, Michael Foot talked to me in the room that had been his study for the previous half-century. Earlier tonight, Gary Gibbon reported on his political life. I've gone back to my interview with him then to extract a few literary nuggets and some of his boundless humour and warmth. It was here in Soho at the Gay Hussar that Michael Foot held court for half a century, lunches, dinners and memorable book signings.
You've seen what I've written about your book, Ian? You've seen that, I trust.
Here too that the literary tangled with the political. For all his radicalism, the Blairites delighted in him as much as the Tory wets, such as the former Minister Peter Walker and the Thatcher irritant Ian Gilmore. This was the magic of Foote, the journalist who'd worked for the right-wing Lord Beaverbrook, and Foote, the politician who'd led from the left. At his 90th birthday party upstairs in the Gay Hussar, he was characteristically droll.
When you get as old as I am, and I'm going to be 90 next week, so they say, when you're as old as I am, you have to make up your mind early on in the evening whether you're going to drink or make a speech.
Politics and writing were entwined in Foote's DNA. His study, solid with books. Books he'd written, books he'd read.
So, what do we have over here?
There's Hazlitt and all his friends. John Keats, whom I would never heard of John Keats if it hadn't been for Hazlitt. My favourite picture of Nye, Jonathan Swift. Nice first editions of Gulliver's Travels and of almost everything else that he wrote.
He himself wrote of Tom Paine, Byron, Bevan. But can a great writer really make a great politician?
I don't think there's any conflict between reading properly about politics and practicing it. Well, and some of the very good ones, you see, the very best ones that I think we're all good readers too.
Who would you list as the best ones?
Well, the best I ever met, of course, was Niren Bevan. I think Nye was the greatest. You see pictures of him there on the wall there.
For his passion, for his compassion, for his oratory, or what?
Well, he was the best. He was the best speaker of the lot, the best debater of the century, in my opinion.
What about more recent figures? I mean, Thatcher, for example.
Unspeakable. I can't say much in her favour. One of the purposes, all these people, by the way, that we've been talking about here, Swift and Hazlitt and the rest, they argued about the division of life of people between the rich and the poor.
One of Fleet Street's most savage and incisive cartoonists, Martin Rowson, saw him on his 96th birthday.
He signed my copy of Guilty Men, which is his great 1940s pamphlet, written pseudonymously, denouncing Chamberlain and the rest of the Tories who got us into the mess of the Second World War. And I gave it to him to sign, and I cannot read the dedication, which is also typical Michael Foote. Terrible handwriting. Great writer, very bad handwriting.
For a time, Foote may be remembered as a cartoon character of failure, but history's long view is more likely to be of an exceptional man of letters who lived an exceptional political life. Michael Foote, who died at 96 today, of whom Tony Blair said tonight, a giant of the Labour movement and a man of passion and principle. We're back tomorrow, 7. Until then, from Krishnan and from me, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Channel 4 Weather, sponsored by Lloyds TSB. Thoughtful home insurance.
Most of Britain will be dry overnight. Temperatures will fall close to freezing in the south and well below freezing in the north, where there'll be a severe frost in places. -20 Celsius is possible over the snowfields in Scotland. It's a generally dry picture again tomorrow, but increasing cloud will bring a few wintry showers into Scotland. The more detailed picture shows the showers mainly affecting the northeast of Scotland. The showers will be very light, but there may be a centimetre of fresh snow in a few places. The rest of Britain will be dry and it will become increasingly sunny during the day. Top temperatures around 7 or 8 degrees, close to normal. And the outlook, more sleet and snow showers will affect the northeast over the next few days, but most places will stay dry. Frosts are likely in many areas overnight.
Channel 4 Weather, sponsored by Lloyds TSB. Thoughtful home insurance.
The country's finest homes are in trouble.
That room is verging on madness.
Here's the pantry. It's more like the garage than the pantry.
Can Ruth Watson help their somewhat unique owners?
How are you?
I don't do that. I'm
You don't do kisses.
I don't like meeting people that I don't know.
Can she persuade the owners of Britain's finest houses to change their ways and save their homes?
I think this is a moment where you really have got to search your soul.
I just wouldn't like it.
How are you spending your days then?
Stupid
It's interesting.
question.
It's not stupid.
It is a stupid question. Tough times ahead in the new series of Country House Rescue. Thursday at 8 on 4.
Returning to where it all began, relocation here in 5 minutes. First on 4, a political slot from the Liberal Democrats.
A child from a poor household, even if he or she is very bright, will in general be overtaken in the classroom by their better off classmates by the age of 6. And after that, the gap tends to grow and grow. By the age of 16, that child is half as likely to get 5 good GCSEs, less likely to go on to study or train, less likely to get a good, stable job. And there are far too many schools who still don't get the money they need to help bridge that gap. The Liberal Democrats have plans to invest £2.5 billion in our schools, so all our children can get the attention they need. In an average primary school, your child's class would go from 27 to 20. At an average secondary school, it would be 16. And there'd be much more money for one-to-one tuition and catch-up classes. We can pay for it if we take the difficult choices about what we can and cannot afford, like phasing out tax credits for above-average income earners and cutting Whitehall bureaucracy to free up money for our real priorities, like schools. I'm at St Mary's in Brent in London, an area with a fair number of low-income families, a school which would receive about £165,000 extra from our proposed policy. I'm here with Jeremy, who's a class teacher in Year 5. Could you tell me what those additional resources would do to help you provide them with the education they need?
Well, I think first having teaching assistants in the class would mean more one-to-one time with the children. I also think the additional money would mean smaller class sizes, which means more resources for the children. It means more space literally in the classroom, so we do more activities. We can look at more computers for classes, having everyone with access to computers. The extra money for helpers in class would make a huge difference.
So, Nick, what's your job?
Well, you've seen Big Ben, of course, House of Commons, so I'm a member of Parliament. And what kind of homework do you have? So you've got reading, but you're doing reading every day, aren't you?
We've got spelling, we've got maths, literacy.
Yeah.
That's it.
Which one, what do you like the most?
Maths.
Really? Really? All of you, maths? You really good at maths then?
Yeah. I do.
I preferred Horrid Henry to maths, I tell you. It's a scandal that in 2010, how well a child does in life depends on where they were born or what their parents earn. It isn't right, it isn't fair. But with your help, the Liberal Democrats can change all of that. In St Mary's and schools like this up and down the country. By investing in children when they're young, we invest in all of their futures. And we give all children the best start in life.
Kirsty and Phil meet the first couple they ever relocated. Catch how they're getting on next. A Latino restaurant is a kitchen nightmare for Gordon at 9. Then after that, it's all kicking off for the Desperate Housewives. That's at 10 o'clock.
Imagine a world without fish.
What is the tuna that you serve, and how is it caught?
In a stunning feature-length documentary, journalist and author Charles Clover investigates the catastrophic results of the abuse of our most vital resource, the oceans.
It is relatively simple to solve. Our entire philosophical approach has to change.
End of the Line, Saturday at 7:15 on 4.
Who is David Cameron?
Who is George Osborne? We have no idea.
Did you get that?
I don't know, and I suspect he may not know either.
This is complete rubbish.
That's what the press is for.
It is very difficult to get your message across.
Is he really the genuine article, or is he somebody who's simply better than his predecessors at presentation?
I mean, you can't win.
Andrew Rawnsley, back on the warpath, presents Cameron Uncovered. Dispatches, Monday at 8 on 4.
Gordon's turn-in marriage counsellor in an hour. Ramsey's kitchen nightmares is at 9 o'clock. After relocation, you're watching Channel 4.
Create the mood to match the food. B&Q, what could you do?
Tonight, we're right back where we started.